Okay, everyone, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. I have another podcaster with me today, and I'm excited to talk all things podcasting. Rob is here with me today. We're going to be talking about his show, what he's doing, and all the great things happening in his side of the mic. And we want to encourage you as podcasters to find your voice, get the tools, get the knowledge you need to start your podcast. And Rob has got great insights and some great things to talk about. Rob, welcome to the How to Podcast series.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, if nothing else, I can be a cautionary tale.
We got lots to learn. We got lots to chat about. Where we start, Rob, tell us about your podcasts and where we can find them to start.
Yeah, sure. So my podcast is called The Family Vacationer. As you may be able to figure out from that, it's about family vacations. About 4.5 years ago, I decided I was going to, as a side, be a travel agent. And in doing that, thought, well, heck, let's start a family travel podcast, because a lot of my most cherished memories from growing up center around the vacations that we took together. You get to see your parents in a different light. They're not so stressed, to cut up with you a little bit more and have a little bit more fun with you. So we did that. So the whole premise of the show is to try to cut down on the stress that comes with family vacations. And we do that by suggesting places to go, not just the bigger cities that everybody's familiar with, but some smaller cities. And then a lot of the topical shows have quite honestly come out of parental failures on my part. I have 3 kids. My oldest son has a pretty intense case of ADHD. And so, trying to navigate vacations with him can be a challenge. So a lot of the topical shows that we've done have come out of things that have happened in our family vacation that I'm trying to keep learning, so I can learn more about, how he sees the world and how I might need to change instead of expecting him to adhere to some rigid rules and whatnot. But yeah, so that's you can find us at familyvacationer.live. And we're on our fourth year, almost exactly to the day, for the Family Vacationer.
Okay, so go back to before the Family Vacationer podcast. Back 4 years ago, you're just at the beginning stages. What would you want to hear on a podcast about podcasting that may have helped you a little bit in the early days?
The best advice is just do it, because I probably came up with every excuse not to do it for about probably 4 months. I had the idea, and I had taken a course on podcasting. I had really written out the first 10 episodes. So there was really no reason for me not to start. I'd gotten a co-host, that somebody I had known forever. I kind of wanted to do I was a travel agent, and he was just kind of your every dad kind of perspective. So it wasn't, so I didn't dive too far in as a travel agent, and kind of kept it broad. Yeah. So I had everything there, and I just came up with excuses. I don't like the sound of my voice. I wasn't sure that I could mix the audio correctly, and so it would sound good. And, so the best advice that I got is just get out there. You're going to make mistakes. That's okay. Your first episode is going to be horrible. That's okay. Don't be afraid of failure. As humans, we learn more by failure than we do success, which is kind of sad, but that's kind of the way it works. So get out there, fail, learn from it, and try to make a better show. So that's what we've tried to do.
So in 4 years of podcasting, there's got to be things that are commonly spoken about in podcasting circles. Is there anything that you hear from podcasters and you're like, that doesn't work for me in my show or my situation? It doesn't really sit well with you, and you're like, I'm not really into that part of that discussion.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I don't know that it bothers me per se. It's just because I was caught up with the rush to have numbers, right? To get a certain amount of listeners, and the rush to monetization. And the frustrating part, or the part of it that frustrates me the most, is that I got caught up in that on the front end. Like, the journey really is the best part of podcasting. I've gotten to learn about cities all over the US, all over Canada. We're starting to do more international shows now that the pandemic's further in the rear view. So, you can easily focus on the wrong things, I think. And a lot of the discussions kind of lead people in that way. I think like you have to have a certain amount of numbers to do this. And certainly there are standards that, if you want to monetize your podcast, there are certain realities you're going to have to deal with. That's just how it is. But for me, the journey really is everything. And I made some mistakes in trying to monetize the podcast. I had told you offline, we changed platforms, podcast hosting platforms, and we went to one that inserted the dynamic ads, and almost immediately our listenership just dropped off considerably. So I had to kind of build back after that. And I had been very careful about that whole question of monetization and how I wanted to do it, when I wanted to do it. At the time, I thought, well, we'll give it a try and see what happens. And again, it didn't work, and so I had to redirect. So, but yeah, I think early on, people they want to get numbers. They see on YouTube crazy numbers, and that's very different than the podcast world. You can be a YouTuber and get those thousands and hundreds of thousands of subscribers, but on a podcast, on the podcast side, I think it's a lot different. It's a lot slower build, at least in my experience.
Yeah, when I go into these Facebook groups and rooms and people talking podcasting, as soon as I see someone post, "Hi, I'm looking for a podcast consultant," or "I'm looking for information," or what, it's like they get piled on by comments, and they're like, there's 40, 50, 60 comments in like minutes of people saying me, kind of like that seagull thing.
Yeah.
Me, I can do it. And I'm just like, oh no, there's a lot of noise in podcasting.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I wanted to have this show, was to kind of take away some of the noise. And again, if all you have in your for your tools is a phone, okay, it's probably not the best way to start, but if that's all you have, then don't wait until you have all the gear.
Yeah.
At least start, right? You can grow from there. So, how did you start out with your podcast?
I did invest in a decent microphone. I come from the music business. That's kind of my background. And so, I was, I got me a nice Shure microphone because that was my one splurge. But I got I got a Zoom board, not expensive at all, and just that was really it. Got a nice pair of headphones. Again, just with the music business as my background, like I had a really nice pair of headphones because that's how I like to listen to music. So that was laying around anyway. So I mean, I think I invested maybe $500, but you can absolutely do it for much, much cheaper than that. And again, your first episodes are probably going to be pretty crappy anyway. So, don't worry about again, I think it's more important to get out there with your voice and your platform and figure out, I also have a marketing background. This is true in marketing. It's definitely true in podcasting. Know your audience. Figure out who you're trying to talk to and what interests them, not necessarily. And so there have been some shows that we have done on the Family Vacationer that are, as a travel agent, might not serve me as well as I would like, but there are things that I feel like parents who travel are interested in. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but there have been times that I've had to go, you know what, I think the audience would like to hear this. It doesn't really benefit me as a travel agent, because one of the reasons I started the podcast was to try to drum up some business as a travel agent. But there are some areas where the show kind of diverts from my needs as a travel agent, and that's okay. I don't go too far, because my agency that I work for, they've been very supportive of the podcast, so I try to respect that. but yeah, I think knowing your audience is key, and you're not going to know that until you get out there and mix it up.
Right. When I started my show, I know we were supposed to create that listener avatar and we're supposed to have a target audience. But part of my thing is I wanted to create a podcast I would listen to.
Sure.
Right. I wanted it to be something that I found interesting and I found engaging and fun or whatever. Because when I listen to other shows, there's things I like about shows and there's some things I don't like about other shows.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of tailor my podcast to be the thing that I would hit play on as well. Because I can't imagine recording a podcast that I would never listen to.
Right.
Because then where's the joy in that? Right.
Yeah. You're gonna get burnt out of that really quick. You've got to love what you do. And that's what I found. I was very surprised how much I enjoyed, especially somebody who doesn't like to hear himself. I had to give up editing duties for our podcast because I would essentially edit myself out of the show almost. Because I just, whether it's a weird breathing noise I make or, something like that, I didn't like hearing myself, and I just had to get over that because I was having fun getting to know different parts of the country. And we've had a child psychologist on several times, and I've learned so much just, in the interview process. And it's funny because when we started, our format was going to be a lot different. I was going to write scripts. We were going to talk about places, but it was just going to be me and my co-hosts kind of back and forth. And then the pandemic hit, and you want to talk about interesting, starting a family travel podcast right when no one is traveling. And that's kind of what happened. And we took a break for about a month as the hysteria was, going all over the world, and kind of reset. And then it was very easy for me to get like Convention and Visitors Bureau representatives to come on the show. One, I'm not charging them anything. And two, it's just an opportunity for them to talk about their city, and people are sitting at home wanting to travel but can't. And I just thought it was what we tried to do too. We found that a lot of our listeners at the beginning were in the Southern US. And so we figured that when travel did come back, it was going to come back first as a road trip because, the idea of going in an airport or getting in a long metal tube with your friends there, during the pandemic wouldn't be on everybody's wish list, at least at the start of it. And that's kind of the way it worked. But we had some great interviews with people. We did shows on the Keys. We did shows on lots of beaches in Florida. And as travel did come back, that's kind of the way it did come back regionally, people taking road trips. And so, yeah, we just kind of had to go with the flow a little bit there. And I think that is part of podcasting too, is just being able to pivot, learn, and don't be afraid to change your format. So,
and taking breaks. I like that. We talked about that as well. Like,
yeah.
Some of the people I've spoken to, the thought of doing a podcast every week for the rest of their natural life seems to be a little overwhelming.
Right.
And they're afraid to take breaks. They think that they have to do seasons because there's no way they can podcast every week. Seasons are great. That's a great option for people, but you can take a break. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about this. And I know that's something that you would love to kind of address, but taking breaks, is it okay?
I think you have to prevent, what they call pod fade or burning out, however you want to put it. I think, they drill in your head if you take courses on how to podcasting, consistency, you got to do it every week. And I think that absolutely does help establish you and get you an audience. But there have been several times when unexpectedly we just had to take a couple of weeks off, and I just explain it as, hey, we're taking a little break, we'll be back. And we don't do seasons because it doesn't really make sense for us to do seasons. If you're doing a thematic show and you're doing a set of shows on one subject, then maybe it does make sense to do seasons. I don't think nobody's like telling me, hey, you're not doing seasons, so you're not going to be successful. Like, it's nothing like that. But yeah, if you need to take a break, just take a break. Take a deep breath. Most of us are doing this as a hobby. We've got a 9-to-5. I've got kids. I've got a wife. They kind of like some attention, so
Yeah.
If it becomes a burden, podcasting isn't a sentence. Like, you're not being sentenced to a lifetime of podcasting. It's supposed to be fun. And if you're not having fun, I think the best thing to do is take a little break and just kind of, reset.
Yeah, and just communicate with your audience. Let them know that you're taking a break because they care about you.
Yeah.
They've had you in their ears for X number of episodes. For you, 4 years. They have a kind of a routine built around you. And when you disappear for a lengthy part of time, they just want to make sure you're okay.
Yeah,
they're like,
for sure.
Rob, are you okay? Is there anything you need? Like, I love your program. I just I care about you. That's all.
Yeah. And if they're a veteran podcast listener, I can't remember what the average number of episodes that most podcasts put out before they disappear. If they've had that happen to them before, if you disappear for 3-4 weeks, they might go, okay, well, this one's going away too, and you might lose audience members there. As long as you're communicating and saying, hey, we just had to take a break, we got some stuff going on. My co-host, he has his own very successful YouTube channel where he is he teaches I always forget. He teaches Spanish, Portuguese, I think, French, and English as a second language for free. It's called The Language Tutor. You can learn those languages. And he's a high school teacher. Wow. He's very active in his church. And so, he hasn't been on with me it's been like 4 or 5 episodes. And I certainly miss having him there because it is more fun to me, having somebody there with me. But that's just, some people are perfectly fine doing the solo shows. But that was just out of necessity. But we could have taken a break. I kind of need this to keep me sane because I love doing the podcast. So I just kept going. But yeah, things pop up and it's okay. Just communicate to your audience that, hey, we're not going away. We're just taking a little bit of a break.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is your listeners don't just listen to your show.
Right.
They listen to other shows and sometimes they get behind.
Yeah.
Like for some of my shows that I listen to, they have like episodes every day or every 3 times a week, whatever. And there's like this avalanche of episodes and you get buried in them and you're like, I can't catch up.
Right.
And if you take a break as a host, that means awesome. I can catch up to where we're most recent, So.
Yeah. I think the way that we consume media has changed so much with Netflix and all of the different streaming services. Like, for example, I'm watching or rewatching Suits that was on, I guess, USA.
Suits. Yes.
Yeah, it's a great show. It's a great show. Mm-hmm. But I'll go through 4 or 5 episodes, binge watching it, and I don't want to watch it for a day or two. I don't want to, like, you almost get too much into it. You want a different, I don't know, different vibe, right? You want something that's maybe just a little more happy or whatever. But and I think that's true with podcasts too. At least, when I started out listening to podcasts, I would binge listen to, a show that I liked. I started off, the first podcast I listened to was, oh my gosh, it was Business Wars. I don't know if you've listened to that one, where they take Coke versus Pepsi or Adidas versus Nike, and they kind of take you through the whole battle of those companies back and forth. And it was super interesting. But after a while, you get a little burnout on it. So you went to something else, and I've come back several times. So yeah, I think that's true with the way that we listen to things now. It's changed so much. You used to have to, wait a week for another show, and that's just how it was because there was no streaming services out there. So I think it's affected how we consume all kinds of media now.
You mentioned earlier about numbers, analytics, all of that stuff. How important is it for you now, 4 years in to your podcast, to know your stats? Because there's probably some information there, but how much importance do you put on the numbers from your perspective as a podcaster?
I will be perfectly honest. I try not to look now, just because I didn't get into it. I think there's people who get into podcasts for different reasons. For me, what I wanted to accomplish and where I'm at, it's kind of changed a little bit. I just really enjoy doing the podcasts. So I'm not as hung up on, are we getting X amount of downloads? Now I will check it, just to make sure somebody's out there, right? So to make sure people are still listening. But it's not really as important to me. Now, if I was starting a business podcast for a business, yeah, that's different, right? You're going to be a lot more concerned with ROI and, all of that. So I think there's a difference there. But for me, where I'm at with this podcast, it's not as important to me as it was certainly when I started. I'm a very competitive person by nature. So I'm, wanting to get the downloads but along the way you realize the journey really is the most important part, and I'm enjoying the journey. I love talking to people from different parts of the country, different tourist destinations. And I'll tell you, a lot of the places like, a New York or a Vegas, places that a lot of people go, those are great. And I love covering those because it is, especially from a family travel perspective, can be a little different than if you're going on a business trip or just going with your spouse or significant other or whatever. But yeah, covering these smaller cities, I've really found there's a lot of places that I would have never thought I wanted to travel to, that just listening to them talk about and seeing pictures and video, and it's made me want to travel a lot more to some of the smaller towns. There's just, a different speed of life and a lot to offer that you wouldn't expect. Just seeing the name of a city. Trying to think of an example. We covered the town in Iowa where the Field of Dreams movie was recorded, and I'm like, I've got to get there. That sounds like such a cool place to visit, and just would have never really loved the movie, but never would have thought visiting the actual city. And there's so much to offer in that small town that it's just cool to discover stuff like that. So long-winded answer to say that the numbers, I don't get as caught up in the numbers game. I don't have an overhead. My wife would love it if we made a little bit of something from the show at some point, and I would love to be able to do that, because I do spend quite a bit of time, doing the show and trying to market the show and that kind of thing. So it'd be nice to get a little something back there, but it's not on the top of my list at the moment. Just enjoying the show.
Yeah. Do you have any way for your listeners to support you? Do you have links or options for them to come around?
Yeah, and I'll be honest with that. I've been kind of lazy with that. We started off having a Patreon link, and I didn't really want to get into all that. It was just, again, coming from a marketing background, if you do that, you really need to make sure that you're giving value and not just expecting people to give you money. Mm-hmm. Now, you brought up a cool way that people can just give you money if they like the show and want to buy you a cup of coffee. I'm intrigued by that. I've definitely been looking into that because that would, really, again, for what I'm trying to do and where we're at, a couple of bucks here and there that take my wife to dinner once in a while, that'd be good. That'd be great. But yeah, like I said, we started out with a Patreon. I think it might still be up on our website, but it's not something that I have aggressively pursued. We'll just put it that way. And again, one of the things when I started the podcast, I was told how important it was to have a call to action in the show. And well, I took that to mean if one call to action is good, well, 5 must be great, right? And that's not really the case. And so the messaging when we do a call to action is really just, if you like the show, subscribe. Like, we'd love to have you along with us on the journey, and try to keep the call to actions pretty straightforward and simple. And it's tough to ask for money in the environment. I'll share with you offline. I've been looking for a full-time gig for a while now, so I understand what the job market's like for everybody, and I'm just going to be very careful if I ask for people's money. Like I said, the cup of coffee thing to me sounds like the coolest way of just saying, hey, if you like the show and you want to throw a couple bucks my way and buy me a cup of coffee, fantastic. If not, no worries.
Yeah, I think if you give your audience an easy way to do that with a low barrier to entry, Patreon is great, but you're signing up in most cases for a monthly payment,
Yeah.
a regular ongoing payment, and some people can't afford to do that. But I just had another one this week. Somebody bought me one coffee, $5.
That's
I think I
awesome.
got $4.20 after all the fees when it came off.
Yeah.
But that's $4 that I didn't have to beg for it. I didn't even really have to ask, but I just have it on my website. And if that serves you and you can help me, great. I do let people know once in a while that, it's about $30 a month for my hosting.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it costs to have a podcast. Because podcast listeners aren't always podcasters. They don't know behind the scenes.
Yeah.
They have no idea. They think it's free. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
So just by telling them, hey, this is what it costs to have a podcast. If you find value, I'd really help. I'd really love your support. Again, I'd love to take my wife out for dinner, buy her some flowers. So if you can help me with that, my house will be a lot happier. So thank you.
What do you think with Patreon? Like, I feel like if you're going to ask for that kind of financial commitment, you need to be producing value just for that group. What do you think? Is that?
And that's that's basically another podcast.
Exactly.
That you're going to do, right? Because you're giving them extra content.
Yeah.
I heard one person say that they stopped their Patreon account because they felt like they were just giving their patrons all the scraps from the episode. So all the bloopers, all the mistakes, all that stuff. And it's like, that's not if you went and got like a really good meal and all of the scraps were like separate, and then you could buy it and pay more for the scraps, which we didn't want to give you because it wasn't good enough.
Right.
I don't know if I'd want to pay for the scraps. I'd want something better. So to sign up as a host of a podcast and commit to doing extra content over and above doing a podcast on the side, that's a big lift for you for maybe the return there. So I know that some people, Patreon works really well.
Yeah.
For me, it hasn't been quite as successful. You got to kind of listen to your audience and find out where they are, really.
For sure. Yeah. And the other thing with our podcast, just trying to figure out what that would look like what kind of extra content that I would give. I couldn't come to in my mind, again, I'm trying to think where would the value be in what I could offer somebody that they would pay for, and I never could comfortably come to I'm just very protective about the audience that I have, because for me, if we're talking about where I want to go from here, a sense of community is something that I've wanted to build, where parents in a very, it's tough in the internet age. I think we talked offline about how I hate Twitter and how it's kind of or whatever it's X, whatever it's called now. And it's how it's it's just a race to the bottom. People being so mean to each other for just because you're anonymous. So I want the opposite of that, if it's even possible in today's age, where parents can just, share best practices. Hey, I've got a neurodivergent child and this works for us. And so another parent can go, oh, I didn't think about that. Let me try that. And like we had a guest on, her, I think 2 of her 3 kids are in a wheelchair, and just kind of putting ourselves in their shoes and seeing how much different it was to plan a vacation with that as a consideration. What true accessibility means for people that have to deal with that, for kids that, want to enjoy a theme park or want to enjoy a museum, but there's no way for them to get their wheelchair to the 2nd floor because you didn't put in an elevator. Lots of cool stuff like that it just helps us share perspective with lots of people that we may not otherwise share that perspective with. I kind of got myself off on a tangent there, but yeah, I mean, that's just another gem of doing the podcast. But to try to do something extra and then ask somebody to pay for it. It just, for our podcast, didn't work or hasn't worked.
Well, the content of your podcast is unique. It's not something that you can find everywhere. There's travel podcasts. Yeah. But you're talking about something very specific.
Yep.
And your listener is like, this is the podcast I've been waiting for because A, I'm planning a trip to that location, and B, the information you're giving to me is going to help my family have a better time.
Yeah.
Together, because now I'm prepared.
Yeah.
So you're giving them something they can't get anywhere else. That's beautiful.
Well, and one of the things, like if you're going to a city like Atlanta, what you need to understand about Atlanta is it's a big city, but it's a big city of small neighborhoods. And if you're going to visit, especially with your kids, you know, where you should stay if it's just you and your wife may be different than where you should stay if it's you and your family. And so that's the perspective that we bring into it. What I call the vacation trinity of questions. We always ask, you know, what's there to do? Where should we stay? What's there to eat? We try to cover that in any destination episode. And then I try in some way, some form or fashion to let the person that we're talking to give the elevator pitch of why their city is a family travel destination. So in a lot of places that's obvious, and other places it's not. We did a whole show on if Las Vegas was a family travel destination or not, because there's definitely different perspectives on if that's the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it could change depending on what time of day it is. You know, during the day, maybe it is a family travel destination. At night, I'm not taking my kids on the street, you know, even just walking from casino to casino. So yeah.
Have there been any benefits or bonus from having your podcast that has come back to your family, maybe above and beyond people giving you money, but just gifts or things that have happened for you because of it?
Yeah, absolutely. We went to Pigeon Forge in Tennessee. It's in the Smoky Mountains. And we had the executive director of tourism for Pigeon Forge on the show. And so my wife and I were actually booked on a cruise. And one of the hurricanes came through and canceled the cruise. And so last minute we changed to Pigeon Forge, decided to take the boys with us. And so I just called up, Leon is his name. I just called up Leon and said, hey, left him a message, say, hey, we just happened to be in town. We're just curious, you know, what was going on? What are the things that we should hit while we're here? Anything new, that kind of thing. And they gave us a VIP card to take around, and we got to experience a ton of the local activity stuff, a lot of stuff that quite frankly, we probably wouldn't have done otherwise, but we got a chance to enjoy. And then, you know, we always do a recap show when we go on vacation. And so
nice.
Yeah, we were able to kind of communicate that to give Pigeon Forge value, hopefully for what they gave us. But yeah, stuff like that is great. I mean, just again, it's a different perspective when you're going on a solo trip or you're going just with your spouse. Or if you're taking your kids with you, what age they are, that's always, you know, different. We did an episode on managing expectations of the family vacation, understanding that with my kids, I have a 13-year-old, I've got a 7-year-old, and I've got a 22-year-old. When we go on vacation, they may all be expecting something different. And so and then my wife and I, between us, we may be expecting something different. And so just trying to figure out what their expectations are, how to get everybody on the same page. You know, that was a great episode that just, again, kind of came out of my own parental failure, but you know, I'm smart enough to know that it's good to find smart people to listen to and to get their perspective. And that was the first time we had a child psychologist, Dr. Emily King, on the show, and she's been on 3 times. And I always joke with her, we have her on it's free therapy for me. So, but she specializes in neurodivergent children, which, you know, is a newer term. A lot of people may not even be sure what that is. And it's, you know, autism, ADHD. And then when we had her on talking about those things, you know, I think of it as a linear spectrum, and she's saying it's much different. There's depth to it, and it's not like most people think of it or consider it. And those are kind of things that a lot of parents may not think about when they're planning a vacation, but might help you have a better one if you do consider it. So
yeah, if we jump back to the monetization part for a second, the money that you saved as a family from, reaching out and having that person on your podcast and then going to that area of the world and them giving you such nice gifts, that is all money that you might have had to spend, which is the same as what could have come into your podcast. So you were making some pretty good money.
Yeah, for
if you think about it in that context, by having a podcast.
Yep. No, for sure.
That's amazing.
Yeah. There would have been no way that we would have gotten that benefit if not for the podcast and not making that relationship. So absolutely. Yeah. There are other ways other than just getting, cash that you can have benefits to the podcast. And again, I think, not to harp on this too much, but I do think that the value of what you learn in the journey, in that sense is every bit as valuable as any money that you could make from it.
And genuine connections with great people. That's what podcasting's about for me as well. I like that.
Yeah, for sure.
It's great.
What have you found as you talk to people? What's the primary concern of most folks when they're starting a podcast?
What does good look like is the one thing I get from a lot of people, because again, with all the noise in podcasting, when you walk into the room, into a Facebook group and you say, hey, I got 10 listens on my last episode. And you're celebrating 10, right? I'm like, I got 10.
Yeah.
And then you see someone else walk in and, well, I had 100,000 downloads in 5 seconds. And you're like, wait a minute. You're thinking, I don't even want to put my hand up and say my number or talk about my success, because everyone just seems to be doing so much better than I am. And it's like, I feel embarrassed.
Yeah.
But 10 people listening to your show on a regular basis when they could be doing any number of things other than listening to your podcast, that's a win.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Like there's something about you as a host that they connect with, and they've decided to not do X number of other things to give time to you.
Yeah. And those 100,000s of podcasts, I mean, you have no idea. Those people could listen to 5 seconds of it, or, success. I think people need to set their own terms of success, right? And I think if you have 10 people that are dedicated to your show, that's 10 more people than 0, right? So I consider that successful. Again, as you get into it and do it more and enjoy it more, unless you have a need for financial gain coming out of the podcasts, in those instances we talked about, I think just having most podcasts fail pretty quickly. So I feel like we've been successful just doing it for 4 years, right? So
yeah,
I chalk that up as a win. And I've heard from listeners that they've benefited from the programming, and hey, that's a win to me. So I think you should define your own success. But I get that. I can see where that, because I was the same way going in. Like, what does successful look like? Well, I can't answer that for you. You need to answer that for yourself. So,
and for the How to Podcast series, my goal for measuring success was, can I help somebody start a show? So Whitney, who lives in the States, listened to my podcast. She heard me say that if you reach out to me and leave me a voice message on my SpeakPipe on my website, I will respond to you. And she's like, nah, who's this guy? He's not going to do it. Right. Yeah. And she heard me say it over and over and over. And then she finally said, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. And she did it. She left me a voice message. From there, we've built a relationship back and forth. And Whitney, I know, is listening. So hi, Whitney. She started her own podcast, the Imposterix podcast. And I've had a small, tiny little piece in her podcast journey. So is my podcast a success? Well, if I hadn't have done this, I wouldn't have never met Whitney.
Yeah.
She might not have her podcast today in the form that she has it. And I wouldn't have a great connection with a great listener who's now a friend. Like,
Yeah,
that's what podcasting is to me, more than
that's a win.
100,000, a number with 100,000 on it of people who I've never spoken to, will never talk to me,
Yeah.
will never engage with me anywhere, and know of me, but don't know me. I'd
Yeah.
rather know Whitney. I'd rather know you, Rob, than some arbitrary number. That doesn't
Yeah,
really
for sure.
sit with me.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by the sense of community. I mean, if you're having hundreds of thousands of download, you're not going to, like you said, you're not going to have relationships with a vast majority of those people. So yeah, I would rather know folks and get feedback from them, find out what they want to talk. They may not have the ability to get the information. Everybody can Google, right? But to have these convention and visitors bureau people, to have a child psychologist on, not everybody has access to those kind of things. So because I do have this platform, if there's a question that I can answer for somebody, if there's like me, if they're not the perfect parent and they do want to learn and they do want to grow, like, how can I help you do that? That is, if I can do that for one person, I am completely happy with doing the podcast.
Amazing. For people listening, Rob, they are interested in travel. Maybe they have family dynamics that require special considerations when they travel.
Yeah.
For your podcast, who would be a great guest for you on your show? Who are you hoping to serve in the future? Let's speak to them directly and, again, promote your podcast, because I think that you have an amazing idea and you have the longevity of what you've done for 4 years. That's amazing. So
yeah,
I'd love for people to connect with you more and kind of give us a sense of where you're heading with the podcast.
Yeah. And again, building that sense of communities is where I want to take it. You get to a certain point though, where you feel like maybe there are things out of your skill set. And that's kind of where I'm at with, because I've gone on Facebook, I've done the small community group thing, and then really struggle with figuring out exactly how to make that work, or how to, what topics people are interested in. What I have found though, I mentioned people with special needs, whether that be, autism or some kind of physical disability. That's an underserved group, the families of those folks, and wanting them to be able to enjoy a family vacation is a driving force. I don't want that to be the totality of what we do as a show, but I definitely want to go in more on that, because again, in talking to different guests, you realize that it's so much of a different kind of thing for them to plan a vacation. A lot of them, especially if they get a diagnosis with a child where, they weren't expecting or something like that, they're like, oh, well, not even thinking about vacation for years, because they're just like, it's too hard. I don't know how to even go about it. And there are more and more companies that are making it easier. And so, if we can kind of bring those companies to the forefront for these people, while still engaging, everybody, because again, everybody, that has a family that vacations goes through the same things. And, it may be more difficult for some families than others, but we all know that there's stress involved with that. So
yeah,
I want to find where those pain points, where the pressure points are, and see what we can do to bring in somebody to talk about how to alleviate those. You're never going to get rid of them. I mean, family vacations are always going to be stressful. That's just kind of how they are. And
yeah,
you remember, what's funny though, is when I think back about my childhood, I'm sure that there were bad times on vacation, but I really do remember the good stuff. There was one time when my dad got mad. We were in the parking lot of the theme park, and I had my cousin and my brother. We were all fighting in the back seat, and we were stopped. And he got so mad, and he stopped, and he turned around and said, "I'm going to stop this car right here." We were stopped, and we just all busted out laughing, and that's been a vacation memory ever since then. So,
yeah.
It's little things like that, but those memories are just so important as we go forward. Anything that we can do as a podcast get through some of the stress and help people just focus on making those memories. That's what we're here for.
And if you represent a vacation destination, you're listening to the podcast, go on Rob's show and, get on there and you can get some promotion for your destination.
What's funny is when I was giving my elevator pitch to, when I first started trying to get guests on, I didn't even think about the fact that some people charge destinations to do it. And so I didn't mention that it was a free opportunity, but that's one of the first things that I mentioned now. So completely free opportunity.
Nice. I love it. Rob, thank you for making time to jump on How to Podcast. I love listening to podcasters that have been doing this for a long time like you. There's a lot that we can learn from you. I hope that we can have you back and have more conversations around your podcast.
Anytime.
But again, where do we find you? Where do we find your show? And maybe a good question too is, where should we start listening from? Back to 4 years ago, or where do we go for your episodes?
Yeah, I wouldn't go back to the first episode. Let's just ignore the first maybe 15. Skip those. But no, you can wherever you get your podcasts, we're there. You could go to www.thefamilyvacationer.live. That's our website where they're all available. As far as where you should start, it really depends on what you got going. If you've got an ADHD child, I would highly recommend listening to Dr. Emily talk about how to vacation with an ADHD child. Like one of the things that little nuggets she gave me was, when a child that has ADHD, a neurodivergent child, kind of pitches one of those fits, right? When you're in a restaurant and you've been there for 2 hours waiting and you're not moving and they just melt down. Not only, it's not that they don't want to listen to you, it's that they can't. Their nervous system hijacks their brain, and whatever you're saying is just that you're the Peanuts teacher. Wah, 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 wah. They can't hear it. And so that to me was like, oh, wow. Okay. So then it's distract and just get them calm, and then maybe have the teachable moment. So if you've got an ADHD child, definitely start there. But apart from that, we've got a primer on cruising. We've got one on all inclusives. So if you've never done either of those, but you're thinking about it, that's a good place to start. Lots of great destinations. Listen to them all.
I love them. Yeah, there you got lots to listen to with 4 years of content. That's amazing. And if you're looking to hire an amazing person, Rob is looking for some work right now. Reach out. Let Rob know that you want to hire him, because he's a great guy. There you go. He's a great guy. He will work for podcasting. He'll do whatever. Rob, thank you so much for being part of the show. I really appreciate having you here. Come back again, please. I'd love to have you.
I will. Thanks so much for having me.
Amazing. And everyone listening as well, you can go check out the howtopodcast.ca website and all the tools and everything there for you to start your show. So, Rob, thank you for being there.
Thank you.